You're listening to the UKC Hunting Ops Podcast, celebrating hunting dog heritage, competition, and community. United Kennel Club has been the hunting dog sports home for coonhounds, beagles, retrievers, pointers, cur, feist, and more for over 125 years.
Welcome back to the UKC Hunting Ops Podcast. I'll be your host today, Trevor Wade. I'm the Coonhound Program Manager here at UKC, and I'm joined today by a couple familiar voices for all y'all listening in. I got the Director of Hunting Ops here, Alan Gingrich. Alan, how you doing today?
Doing good today.
Yeah.
Good to be here.
Then I got the Vice President of UKC, Todd Kellam, joining in today. How's it going, Todd?
Pretty good.
Good.
See you guys.
First one in the new year here. We're taping here at the beginning of January. Did everybody have a good Christmas and New Year and all that good stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, except we didn't have ice. That's the one thing this time of year, all of us ice fishermen want to get out and get going. And that was the thing, no ice. So
yeah, we had some really cold weather there for about a week and a half, and then it's just the opposite.
It had just gotten started. There were some guys just getting on safe ice on some of the early lakes, and then we got all that snow.
Yeah.
That's hard on ice. And then when you get the warm weather, it's like, no, we got to start over.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember it being as warm as it has been the past week, probably this time of year. It seems like kind of unseasonably warm, especially after that real bad cold snap.
Yeah. It's from one extreme to the next, it seems like. There we had a couple of weeks ago, we had high winds, or winds that was like 30 below zero, and now it's 45 degrees outside. Yeah. But hey, you and I are headed to the Grand American later tomorrow this week.
Have you looked at the forecast at all?
Yeah. I like it.
Good?
It looks good.
Mid-60s, 70s.
Yep.
Very little rain, but that can change in an instant, but you never know. But I'm looking forward to a little bit of reprieve. So flying down tomorrow, actually.
Yeah. So we'll probably be sick here in the next month or so. 30 below zero to 50 to 70 and back to 20.
Hopefully we stay dry. That's the main thing, right? Yeah. So speaking of bringing in the new year, got Grand American on tap here this coming weekend, and then we got Winter Classic next on the schedule for the coonhound folks out there listening, and that's kind of what today's going to be dedicated to. The three of us sat down and talked back in August about Autumn Oaks history, and that was kind of a well-received podcast. Had a lot of listeners, got a lot of feedback from it, talking about the history of that. So we decided to do something similar for Winter Classic, and I couldn't think of a better two guys to talk to about it. Todd, I know you've been to virtually all of them outside of the first one.
That's why he brought in the old guy, the history show.
Yeah, you could have probably took this one all by yourself, but we'll sit down here and ask you a few questions, I guess.
But Trevor and I are good for the last 10 years, but that first 30 years, we're leaning on you.
I'll have a lot of information for the past 3 or so. So
it's like I told you two guys, I thought I knew a lot about the history of the Winter Classic till I saw Trevor's show notes, and I thought, geez, I forgot a lot of it.
Yeah. I think I kind of scared everybody with my show notes, but I think the media guys, I sent them 14 pages worth of notes. So like, got to try to keep this under, in the safe range here. But 36 Winter Classics now. This one coming up in 2023 will be the 36th Winter Classic, and I guess it still seems kind of relatively new when you compare it to like Autumn Oaks and Grand American. But 36 years, that's an impressive run.
For me, that was about I started, my first night hunt was in 1989. So the first Winter Classic was 88. Is that right? 1988. So I really don't, that was already in place, I guess. And at that time, I was green to a lot of things. So it's not something that I
wasn't on your radar.
Not really, no.
So, to go back, first Winter Classic was January of 88. And I started at UKC in May of 88. So I only missed it by a few months making the first one. And then, I worked all of them up till a couple of the recent ones I've missed. Other travel obligations. But that's a long stretch, man.
I guess starting out, the whole reason for the implementation of the Winter Classic may have been historically before that, most of the major events, especially in UKC's registry, of course, there was the Grand American, but that was held in a different registry at the time. We didn't have such a major event, kind of a high-profile major event in the South at the time.
Yeah, and I think part of it was, UKC does a good job at administering our own major events, and it was, something to do in addition to Autumn Oaks for the people in the South or for the people in the North to come down out of the winter. And it was just another big event for us to do ourselves, really.
So where was the American heritage at that point? What
So
was
that-
up with it?
That didn't come along till later.
Okay.
And then following on the heels of the Winter Classic, we thought, well, let's do one out west also. And UKC will administer 3 in addition to the World Hunt, remember?
Yeah.
So can't forget that. But yeah, so we'll, the American Heritage Hunt had a good little run out there, and it finally tapered. But
yeah, but back then there weren't very many major events at all. You had those couple that UKC had, and then the breed day events, and that was about the extent of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So given the people in the South was a major part of it, and I know you probably weren't around whenever they were picking Albany, Georgia, but can you tell us a little bit about those first few years where it was actually held at the South Doherty Community
I
Center?
remember it well. And I can't believe, did I never drive you out there and show you that? It seems like I might have.
I think one of the first trips I was down there, we went by it,
So,
I think.
if I
So I
remember-
did see part of it. It wasn't like a long drive back into
And I want to say,
what I
I don't know
remember.
if it's 10, 15 miles, and I want to say east of Albany. But, Albany was still our host town with our hotels. And you drive out through, and you start to get into plantation country, and you're on this little road, and like you said, you pull down this long drive with the tall pines bordering the drive and a big white manor house down at the end of it, like an old classic plantation manor house. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful. Now, it was not a huge piece of property. So even when I saw it the first time, I thought, where are we going to park everybody? It's all really nice manicured grass. The house is beautiful. And we got that set up to where hunters have to go in there to check in. And it's nice carpet and tile and stuff. And I'm thinking, oh man, muddy boots. But we did have a big tent set up out in the yard. So that's where we conducted all the drawing, and the organizing casts and the seminars, which we're going to talk about later. It was just a beautiful setting. And it was there for 3 years. And just what we predicted would happen did, and that was to get some rain. Now trucks start cutting up the grounds. It really wasn't, by that point, we were kind of outgrowing it anyway. And it didn't have a big dog barn, which was a big thing back then for the...
Right. So what did the entries look like in those early days?
I got you right here if you want me to.
Take it.
That first event, like you said, the last weekend in January, which it was up all the way until 2017 after the move to Batesville, which we'll get to later on. But that first event, you had 15 vendors there, which I thought was interesting to note. 470 pre-entries for the hunt, which was the only way to enter at the time. And then around 150 entries into the show. It didn't have an exact number.
But you have to remember that those pre-entries, that was a setup at that point to run like Autumn Oaks.
Yeah.
Where it was a one hunt run.
That's right.
2 nights.
That's right. Yeah, this was in the very first year. It would have just been like Autumn Oaks South. It's one hunt ran over 2 nights.
Yep.
The way you awarded everything from Grand Night Champions of Breed, which is how Autumn Oaks still is. That's how you used to award them there. First through third night champion, first through 10th registered, all the same as Autumn Oaks. And
when you got
show,
a model as successful as Autumn Oaks, why wouldn't you follow up with it, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. And the show started out just being, I thought this was interesting. The registered show was on Saturday, and then actually the champions and grands and the pairs showed on Sunday after the night hunt awards. And I'm not sure how long it was like that. I think just the first couple of years, but that's
you
kind of
remember
foreign
that?
I don't remember that.
Yeah, that may have just been a first year thing, but that's.
I don't know why it would have been set up that way.
Now that you mention that, I think I remember reading that too.
Yeah. And then that first year, it was always interesting to talk about satellite clubs and where they started out. Started out obviously with the Deep South Club there, right in Albany, and then you had satellite clubs in Moultrie, Valdosta, Thomasville, Brookfield, Cairo, and Cochran, all there in Georgia.
Now, one thing you have to remember is the Deep South Club wasn't formed until the event 3 years after it started, moved to the Exchange Club Fairgrounds. That's when the Deep South Club was formed.
Yeah.
And it was formed because, Jimmy and Carol are like, how come you're not hunting any dogs off the ground? You're sending them all to satellites? We can hunt plenty right here around Albany.
Wow. Yeah.
So they formed that club just as a host club for the Winter Classic.
Isn't that
And
something?
it went on to be a successful club with RQEs and everything else they did. But the first 3 years, there was no Deep South
Send
Classic.
them all to other clubs.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting. And one that we just talked about before we came on air, one note that was in talking about it beforehand was that this event was the first major event that featured a new state-of-the-art style collapsible show bench. That was unheard of before this show, apparently. The first major event where this got brought out, and you kind of knew about that personally, right?
But it's fun to think about that because when I started here out in the garage, we had these big, long show benches. There's probably 4 of them that would hold, I don't know, 3 or 4 dogs on one bench.
Right.
We carted those things all around the autumn oaks. But yeah, so I think in the notes there it said something about Kerry Linton, but the truth is I think Martin Blackmer, an old plot guy from Michigan, he came up with that idea, as far as I know, and marketed it as a Bearcat bench, which was the name of his kennels. And
you still see that BC on
we had
the
one
bench
out in the garage not too long ago.
We still do, yeah. Half of them are still out there.
Have 6 or 7 of them.
So, Martin was up in age at that time, and he was building benches, and it was taking off around the country. We started using them, and that's when Kerry Linton took them over from Martin.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he made some improvements. I think he went from pine to oak and some different things.
Yeah. They're super heavy. We still use them. We've done some repairs on some of them, but they're still the same benches we're using. Now, the one thing I've been wrong for a lot of years, I always, for some reason, thought the first Winter Classic was in '85. And when I tell people about these benches we still have, I always tell them they've been around since '85, but I was wrong. It's actually '88. Yeah.
Yeah, so the next year, moving into '89, second year into it, there wasn't many changes. I think we're just probably going to hit the highlights of what happened every year, maybe, or as highlights come over the years. But one thing I saw that was a little bit different that people today wouldn't be familiar with was this would be the first year that the champion class was split into 2 different sexes. The males showed against each other only, and the females against each other only. In '88, all the champion show people showed together and actually were placed in the show. So I thought that was kind of interesting. That happened in '89, and there was a little bit of a mention, and I had to give it in here for our friend LB Neat in 1989. His son Gary won the coon squalling by mouth contest for the second year in a row, and he was 6 and 7 years old when he was winning these, going against adults. So,
do you remember that?
See, I remember having those coon squalling contests. Yeah. We'd have mechanical division and mouth division.
That used to be a big thing back in the day, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You get 5 or 6 entrants. It seems like.
Yeah,
it's hard to get people to do that kind of stuff anymore. It seems like, I don't know, but that would be so fun to watch back in the day, especially, youngsters competing against adults even.
Talk about LB Neat guys like that. When I think back of the Winter Classic, I think of Max Summerlin. For some reason,
Well, he was the master of hounds.
He was kind of the face for officials for UKC in that era.
Yeah.
The first 18 years, Max Summerlin was the head master of hounds at Winter Classic, and we were going to give him his dues for that. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, he deserved it.
Yeah.
Very well respected.
So back in, I wonder why that area, warmer climate, obviously, and in the South, but the hunting was, it's not the best hunting in the world or in the country, but back then that was big for birds, bird hunting, obviously.
And still is.
And they used a lot of the plantations around that area to hunt. But how was the game back then?
Yeah, it seems like that was always in down there. Feeders are a big part of it, right? And that can skew your hunt. One cast is not on feeders and one's on good feeders, and that makes the draw kind of important.
One of the first times I hunted at the Winter Classic, I remember that we were on some type of a quail plantation. I think everything was flat, and it had some. I remember it had a water puddle. What looked like a water puddle to me. And I step into that thing, and down I go. That was, back home.
So no bottom in that puddle.
No bottom in it. It got my attention big time, but that was something that was different. But yeah.
That Albany area is historical as far as quail hunting and all-age field trials for the pointers, and it still is to this day.
Well, see, when I started here, my first Winter Classic was in 2005, and then they always had some bird dog event going on down there on the same week.
It was a Quail Unlimited banquet, which was a fundraiser for.
Okay, so it was just a banquet.
And I think they did some celebrity hunts and things like that. Yeah.
So was that going on back in the late 80s when you were?
No, that came along later.
One cool picture in that 1990 issue of Coonhound Bloodlines, there was a picture of you actually out in the field doing, I think, a Wednesday evening quail hunt. It said probably the day you guys flew in early and you got in a quick quail hunt. So that's...
Yeah, I think that was with Jack Jones. He was he was a prominent one down there for us, lining up guides and stuff. And he was a bird hunter too. And you get to talking to guys at events. He's like, next year we'll do a bird hunt. And of course, I had to say yes to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so going to 91, that's the year you said, of course, after 3 years, moved to the Exchange Club Fairgrounds. And that move seemed like, as it was growing, had to kind of grow with it. So
yeah, it was needed, and it worked well for a lot of years.
That fairgrounds is a little different than most fairgrounds we go to. Talking about the Exchange Club, it's ran by a group of prominent businessmen.
Well, it's like a Rotary Club, I think would be the way to explain it. It's a very tight group of businessmen in that town, and it's like a Rotary Club. They meet on other things. They have their county fair.
Yeah.
And then in addition to that, I think this was their biggest event that they look forward to.
Yeah.
And they showed up in force, didn't they?
Oh, they did. And food, man, they used to have food down there. That was a big thing, and had a nice big kitchen there.
That kitchen was good.
Very good. Breakfast started first early in the morning with breakfast. They had it all there.
They had their orange jackets on. They were very identifiable. They sold tickets to a rifle every year right where you walked in the headquarters building. And I can remember we'd pull on the grounds, and they'd all come running for their pin. Remember those pins we give to all entries?
Yeah.
Those guys, they look so they'd have those hats just full of hat pins.
Yeah.
They love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so by 1991, you were hunting 511 dogs entered in the hunt, 164 in the show. And this is a year that you guys went to a 2 bench show judge format, splitting it up where one judge was doing registered in pairs in the morning, and then later that afternoon after the unlicensed kids bench show would have been champions, grands, and overall by a second judge. And to this day, we still use a 2-judge format for Winter Classic.
Yeah, let's talk about those first shows, though, at Exchange Club Fairgrounds. They had that covered arena, open-sided arena out where the dog barns are. And that's where we held our show for, I don't know, the first 10 years maybe.
Yeah.
And man, I mean, you're in South Georgia, you think it's always going to be beautiful, right? No. There were some cold, windy days out under that open-sided thing, and you're trying to hold your bench show cards, and you got gloves on, and dog barn dogs are barking. It was miserable.
Yeah.
That building was probably kind of like a refrigerator, wasn't it? No insulation or anything. If it was cold, it was cold in there.
So eventually we made the decision to move the show. I don't know if that's in your notes or not.
It will be, yeah.
Okay.
I think it was the first year, maybe the first time Wayne Cavanaugh, after he became president, was at the event. And you talk about it in one of your articles, how you've never been so excited to give an announcement that this will be the last time this show's ever in this open-sided barn out there.
And really, the headquarters building wasn't quite big enough for a show, but it was still better than where it was. We had to cut out some vendor booths and open up that one end of it for a show arena. And it was tight, but it was better.
So what year was that? What year did that happen?
We'll have to get to it. It's on in the early 2000s, I believe.
Hey, if you think about it, it was probably that way from the get-go there at that in that building, but that was packed tight.
Oh, yeah.
Vendors, we'd have 2 vendors down the center, back to back down the center of the building, and then along each side of the building. But just the small aisleways, and then that, by today's standards, that bench show ring down there at the other end was small.
Yeah.
Packed. It was wall, elbow to elbow, and hard to get through there.
You guys suffered through that open-sided building all the way to 2002. You put your time in out there, I guess. It's a lot of cold Saturdays.
Yeah, that's for sure.
But I did want to note the overall bench show winner this year, World Show Champion, Grand Champion, Capital City Sam, Johnny and Lakita Brinkley. As you read through the Winter Classic history, those are names you see over and over and over again. And Sam in particular, this is a dog in the second ever Winter Classic. He was the best male of show. The next year in 1990, he was the champion male. And then in 1991, he ended up winning the overall. So
that dog went
pretty impressive
win everything.
Yeah.
In shows.
Yeah.
So we'll fast forward a couple years to 1993. And this was a year that, you guys started using, did away with the convoys, and you started using a draw system. And I think we talked about that a little bit in Autumn Oaks. That might have been the first time you ever did it with the Winter Classic, the following, but with the whiteboards and the maps and kind of doing away with the convoys. And it was just, here's your map, here's how you get there. You need to be there by 7 p.m. And that probably took a lot of pressure off of.
I don't know if it was the last year that we did convoys, it would make sense in my mind that it was, but I can remember the only time we ever had an incident that I was involved with. It was at Albany at the Exchange Club Fairgrounds. We were lining up convoys on that back road. So you got 30 or 40 trucks in a line, right, trying to get everybody organized. And there was one animal rights lady that pulled up on the road right in front of this line of trucks, and she's going to stop the hunt. One person, not a whole group of them.
Yeah.
And I was there, so I can remember her screaming, "You're about the coons. You're going to traumatize them. You're going to traumatize them." Finally, I think the police come and shuffled her off, and that may have been when we stopped the convoys. I don't remember, but I do remember that incident.
Yeah. Doing away with convoys, but still at the time, you guys were still getting, you hunted 550 dogs at this time over the 2 nights. That was your cap of hunters going to the woods. And if you equal that out, you still have non-hunting judges at the time. That's 70 a night. Can you talk a little bit about that process? I can't imagine it today trying to get together 70.
You know, it was part of it back then. So people stepped up. They knew it was expected and it was a responsibility for being, you know, a competition hunter. And yeah, it was hard. I'm not going to say it wasn't hard, but it was expected. So
you didn't know any different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And really, for a lot of the locals, that's what they probably did. They used them to probably judge, so they didn't even get to hunt.
Yep.
An event that's right in their backyard.
I mean, you're hoping your judges were the most qualified guys. Now, were they always, or were they the guy?
I can tell you exactly how. By today's standards.
Okay, and that's why eventually we had to make the switch, right? Because you don't have the most qualified guy carrying the scorecard on a cast.
But I don't think back in those days the expectations of the judges weren't nearly as great as they are today.
Yeah,
I don't think so. You know, that wasn't that big of a deal. I don't think back in the day so much.
I can see that.
It really didn't lend to that many problems. I mean, if you think back, we didn't have any more formal complaints than we do today that I can remember.
Yeah, when you look through the history of the event, it always alludes to how few questions or problems there were. So the judges must have been doing okay, but also it's a testament to the local clubs and to UKC and to the officials making sure they were getting quality judges and also making sure the hunters knew before they went to the woods that it wasn't going to be tolerated that way.
Yeah, so when I first came on, the Chamber of Commerce was huge there for us, and probably still sets they're the model chamber that I've ever dealt with, I guess. How was it back when you first started? Were they very involved?
I think that evolved when we made the move to the Exchange Club. I think that was all part of that evolution. That city saw that this event was a success and how many people it drew. And it was just a natural progression. And you're right, that was one of the best we've ever had.
And not just that, the locals came out. For the Saturdays, it was the crowds were huge. And there was a lot of hunters and things like that, but the locals made up a lot of that crowd as well.
It was a fairground type atmosphere, a little maybe tighter than Autumn Oaks that as far as the ground. So it seemed busier, but the dog barns are full and it did have a fair atmosphere to it.
Then we get to 1995, and it just an important note that year. That was the first and only time that we had a dog win Winter Classic for a second time. That was 2-time Albert, Black and Tan from East Tennessee. I guess I got to give Gene and Mitch a little bit of kudos for that feat.
Some of your relation there.
That's right. Yeah.
Isn't he your uncle or somebody?
He's my Mama's first cousin. So,
okay.
But growing up, you always hear it, whether you're related to him or not, you hear about 2-time Albert. I guess he's kind of a well-known dog in that part of the country, and I guess all over. So going forward to 96, another interesting note about the show and just how the show's progressing and to get to where it is today. This would have been the first year that instead of awarding just a overall grand champion winner in the show, you awarded a grand champion male and a grand champion female to move on to the last show of the day. So that's a little bit different, something that we just always do at all our events now, but a little bit different back in the mid-90s even.
Yeah. Were they still using the long benches back then or for the show?
No, we already covered that.
Oh, yeah, we did. Yep.
I don't remember what year that was, but
The very first one.
Yeah,
88
so
yeah. So, and then in 1997, that's whenever you made the big move, and there was a big write-up about it in the 97 Coonhound Bloodlines, the March issue, the first UKC-sponsored major event where hunting judges were used on all casts. What was, I can only imagine the talks and the buzz around the fairgrounds.
And then you got your fingers crossed and holding your breath that it worked, but gosh, it made our life a lot easier.
Did you get a lot of backlash from it?
I don't remember that.
You don't?
I think it was seamless, and as it has been with different hunts that progressed to that, it really didn't disrupt things.
Just from some of the stuff you see, it's almost backwards from what we think about now, because people were talking about how big of a disadvantage it's going to be for them to have to be a hunting judge now. And then you alluded to, if you broke it down going through the scorecards, basically 70% of the high scoring or the cast winners high scoring dogs ended up being hunting judges. So it didn't have that kind of effect that you would think.
Yeah, and I always try to tell people, so is it a disadvantage, to have to listen to your dog and listen to this guy call, or is it a disadvantage to have to explain to the judge why he's scoring something wrong? Which one is more work? So I don't remember. It seemed like it was seamless, and just became the norm.
Yeah.
After that,
works good.
Yeah.
And by 97, this is the year that a pretty familiar dog for anybody, Northern Blue Levi, owned by Ron Taylor, just up here in Indiana, won this year. And just a note that you guys made, 4th year in a row, he was the high scoring Grand Night champion blue tick at this event. 4 years in a row, coming from Indiana down to Southern Georgia. Not an easy feat.
At an event with that size of entry, I mean, the odds are against you.
Alan, we both had Dogtra Pathfinder 2s now for a little while. What do you think about yours?
I'm liking mine. One of the things I had the opportunity to now download a map of an area where I did not have service, and I've used it there, and it has worked flawlessly. I love it.
Yeah, I love the crystal clear maps. I love that I never lose reception on my dog's collars anymore. Highly recommended by me as well. Dogtra Pathfinder 2, the official GPS collar partner of UKC. And heading into the year 2000, the new millennium, this was kind of a big year for the event because this is the first year that it kind of went off of the Autumn Oaks format and had its own format where a dog could be entered into both nights of the hunt for the first time. And actually, you did away with the cap on how many dogs you could hunt. There was no 550 cap anymore on how many dogs could hunt at the event. It basically boiled down to we'll hunt as many dogs as we have guides to take them to the woods.
Right, and that's probably due to the success of the hunting judge, right? So we were able to accommodate more dogs. We had guides, the clubs down there were doing a good job with guides, and we could hunt more dogs, and that was a way to do it.
Yeah, and at this time you kind of changed the awards a little bit. You were doing first and second grand each day, first through third night champion, and then first through 10th registered at this time. And it talked about 2000 there being a real bad snowstorm that year. I guess probably not down in Albany, but in the rest of the country where it makes note that you guys got back to the hotel after doing your setup on Thursday, and the receptionist at the front desk had dozens and dozens of notes from people that called your hotel asking about if the event was still going on or not. Now that's kind of foreign to us. Our Facebooks and our cell phones will be blowing up, but back then they're calling the hotel. So I know weather was always kind of an issue, no matter where you are in January and February. It can always be unpredictable and cause big issues. Moving forward into 2002, and this I think this is worth noting, is you guys talked about this being the largest crowd that you've seen to date as far as walk-around crowd and also entry crowd. And you guys credit it to local radio advertisement that would have came from a new sponsorship deal with Anheuser-Busch coming on board.
Yeah, so one of the things the city was good about, or it took advantage of while we were there every year, was to have one of the local stations out there doing live broadcasts from the grounds. So you'd have to walk out there and get on the mic with the local DJ and, tell the community what's going on, because, gosh, there's all the traffic and all the trucks parked out there at the fairgrounds. They're wanting to know what it is. So they loved doing that.
Anheuser-Busch. And then like we talked about a little bit earlier, 2002, that's the year you guys finally did away with the outside open-sided barn show and moved it inside into the arena.
We should touch on that Anheuser-Busch sponsorship. That that was new at that time in the sport.
Yeah.
And they were really helping us a lot. But at the same time,
pretty controversial.
How's that going to go over? With this, they did those big Budweiser Eagle Awards, and that became something that everybody wanted.
It kind of became a staple for the event for awards.
Those
things weighed like 30 pounds, I think.
But even after the first year, when we went into that kind of wondering how that's going to be received, I remember there being only one complaint. I'm not going to name the individual, but I can remember one person who said they thought it was terrible that Budweiser was affiliated with a coonhound event. But everybody else, they, of course, there was no beer on site or anything, and it's just that they did, nice things for the event.
They were signage for it was. They had it plastered everywhere.
Yeah, nice awards.
How do you get somebody like that on board? Were they just local to the area? Is that what it was?
Yeah, it was a local distributor.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Ray, and I cannot remember Ray's last name for the life of me.
Yeah.
He was instrumental in really growing that as far as what we would do today with all the media stuff,
Yeah.
Yeah, but there was probably no other event before or since then that had as much signage as what they provided for us there around town, everywhere you look,
all over the city,
over the city. Nice signs.
Yeah,
all over. Yep.
Yeah. The next year here, 2003, is whenever the first dual champion class was put into the show, taking place of the pairs. And that actually came in kind of a staple of the event, where the dual champion winner actually was the next few years moved on to the final show to show for overall in the next few years.
Yeah.
2004, and this is something Alan and I talked a little bit about yesterday, and it's kind of the first time you see it alluded to in coonhounds, where there was broadcasting and taping at the event. It talks about the events were being broadcasted on World Sport Network as part of VOOM on all satellite services, and there was a lot of pictures of Wayne at the time going around and interviewing and getting highlights of the show and different things like that. That's 2004.
Yeah, and I remember the celebrity or whatever you want to call her, the person that was there was Andrea Joyce.
Yep.
You still see her at times on Olympic coverage and stuff.
Yep.
So she was there and actually went out on a cast, and they were, he stepped up the show arena, made it look a little nicer. Yeah,
that was about the time when Wayne Cavanaugh came on board, right?
Yeah,
about that time.
Yep.
Say that's some of the earlier times that you'll see of trying to broadcast coonhound events across pretty cutting edge stuff at the time, I would say.
Yeah, and that's like the first event or the first time that I remember of any coverage like that to that extent of a coonhound event. And it was pretty cool, really.
Yeah, it was good. And I think it was the first. I don't remember doing that.
They set the groundwork for a lot of stuff that we're trying to do today.
Yeah. Part of one thing I remember, I wasn't there that year, but I sent a dog down with old Joe Melton.
What, Tex?
Yep. I sent him down there. And I remember I had to call you afterwards and apologize a little bit, because I guess he ended up getting in a little scuffle with somebody, and he ended up getting scratched before he ever left the clubhouse. I was with my dog. I was so embarrassed. But anyways, I think I called you next week and apologized. Like, man, I did that. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. And I don't remember what all the details were, but God bless him.
I don't remember it also.
Yeah.
Must not have held it against you.
Yeah. Water under the bridge now. Around this time in the early 2000s, you're looking at 820 hunt entries, 260 show entries. This event is just on par with Autumn Oaks at this time.
Yeah, blowing up at this point.
Yeah. And I guess because of that, this would have been the first year in 2004 whenever you decided to have a 2-day show, Friday and Saturday, instead of having it all on Saturday. I think the Saturday shows were getting a little lengthy into the evening, and so you cut it up into 2 days, and having the two judges kind of worked out. You would have one do duels, pairs, and top 10 on Friday, and then you'd have registered champion, grand champion, and overall on Saturday at this time, which would change in the future as well. But that's kind of how it was cut off at first.
Yeah, it worked well, and it was nicer for the people that were showing too, right? So it just spread it out for everybody and shorter days.
Yeah. And then 2005 was kind of a big year in a different way. That wasn't directly through Winter Classic, but this would have been the year that Grand American became a UKC event. The entries were a little bit down from the year prior. Talked a little bit about how maybe Grand American becoming a UKC event and a major UKC event in the South there at the beginning of the year might have had some effect on the Winter Classic event.
Probably did a little bit.
Well, if you think about it, you got 3 major events, all North Carolina, South Carolina, and Grand American.
Yep.
If you look at Southeastern Walker Days, you got all those within, on some years, close to a month difference.
Yep. Yeah.
People had to make some choices.
Yeah. Probably set the groundwork for some decisions to come at a later date, probably down the road, right?
Yep.
A lot of memories on that in that little era right there for me.
Was that your first one?
Grand American was my first event that I went to for UKC. You and I went. Remember where they put us in that little wall over there, that little small building there? First year. Yeah. Second year we graduated to a different spot. But yeah, that was and then that was also my first Winter Classic.
Yeah.
Back then, it was hard to get a vendor spot at the Grand American. It probably still is.
Yeah.
Because people would hold on to their spot
they really didn't,
year as long as you kept applying. You'd hold your spot.
They kind of put us in the aisleway that was against the wall there, and we really blocked it off there. But that was not very pleasant, to be honest.
In 05, just we talked about Max Summerlin a little bit earlier. That was the last one he did, 18 in a row he did from 1988 through 2005. So Max put on a lot of these events and did well at it. So we'll give him a shout out on here.
Yeah.
2006, also a little bit different than just talking about it, but this was the year from 1988 to 2005. The March issue of Coon Down Bloodlines was the English issue. It always had Winter Classic in that March issue, but in 2006, the March issue became a Winter Classic specific, and I think English would have got moved to June or July. I think it is June. That it is today. Man, we get questions about this sometimes about the covers of magazine. That's probably a really big change, especially if you're an English fancier, right? Yeah.
Didn't take it away from them. Just
moved it.
Yeah, just changed it up a little bit.
Yeah.
But give the credit, to the dogs at the Winter Classic. That was a nice.
Absolutely deserved it. They absolutely deserved it. And also this year is when you moved the registered portion of the show to Friday to split up that. I think the split wasn't quite down the middle as you wanted, because on Friday with that portion of the show with the registered, the duels, the pairs in the top 10, they were done by about noon. And then on Saturday, I think they went to 6:30, it said. So try to even it out a little bit for them. So we talked about Budweiser and Anheuser-Busch a little bit earlier. 2007, there was a bunch of pictures in the magazine with the Budweiser Clydesdale there on site, people taking pictures with it, and I got a pretty good laugh out of that. That's pretty cool. I would have wanted to take a picture with it too, but to have it on site there is pretty neat.
I remember that year when they were there.
Yep.
Let's see. Fast forwarded into the late 2000s here. Let's see. 2009, first time that a warm-up slam was held at the Winter Classic event. Kind of become a staple of the event here in the past few years for sure. But
yeah, I kind of forgot about that. Obviously, I was involved with that, and now that you mention it, I kind of remember it. It kind of comes back a little bit, but I guess that's where we had the first warm-up slam hunt, was there at the Winter Classic in Albany. Yeah.
And then the next year in 2010, the article talks about how Allen and the hunting ops team came up with an idea to facilitate the process for confirming advanced entries that it greatly improved the lead times and the wait times for confirming events. And if I'm not mistaken, it's pretty similar to what we still do today. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. It is basically the same thing as what we're doing now. I don't remember all the specifics, but it was, I guess, it was different than you used to do it. Yeah.
It's crazy. There's always...
Would Todd Morgan have been on staff at that time? So it was mostly you and Todd that came up with that system.
Yeah. That's why I still say today, Todd Morgan was doing all that when I came here, and I kind of worked behind him, even being the manager of the coon programs. I still...
Because I would have been doing the show.
Yeah, you were doing the show.
And confirming hunt entries. I was...
Yeah, you still announced all the casts and stuff. You called all the casts and all that. But that's why I still say today, hey, I did all the behind-the-scenes stuff, or worked on the computers, things that you and some of the others have that do now, So,
yeah.
the back end of things,
Yeah, crazy how you try some new things, and there's always room to improve some way. So you got to keep trying different things and see what works, and it seemed to work.
Yeah, and at some point we always just had allowed for 250 entries each night, and the rest were all put on waiting list at some time. At some point we changed that a little bit.
Yeah. So the next year, 2011, and this was a big year for the event. It's still how it is now. Is instead of the overall winner being the highest score from either night, individual cast winner score, this is when it moved to double cast winner combined score would be the overall winner starting in 2011.
Yeah, and that was a good way to do it. That was a good.
I'm surprised it took us that long.
I know.
Because we talked about down there the hunting being a little bit more spotty and good spots and bad spots.
Yeah.
So that made things a lot more fair.
Yeah, it sure did.
We've worked and worked, it feels like, and obviously way before I got here, but even in the past few years, we've worked and worked towards getting away from high scores being the kind of thing and where it's almost becomes dependent on people getting out of the way and withdrawing from the cast or getting scratched from the cast to have such a major effect and for you to have a win like that. So I think definitely the double cast win definitely had a good impact, and it still works well today. We still see really reasonable scores, and it works out great. And let's see, this 2011 also, not to mention the show, at that 291 entries in the show that weekend. That's the largest show entry at that time. So, and that was the year before the 25th anniversary in 2012. If anybody has that March 2012 issue, it was I really enjoyed that article specifically that you wrote there in 2012 about the history, and I got a lot of information from that, and it's a great resource for anybody who likes history of events and coonhound events. And another major thing that happened there on the 25th anniversary, this would have been the first time that a American Leopard Hound won a major event that year. Wilson's all-night striker, Lamar Meeks, handled by Harry Brock, won the hunt that year. First major win for a Leopard Hound.
I remember that.
Yeah, he was a double cast winner, but he had a good score one night, but yeah, double cast winner. He was a stub-tailed dog. I remember that. Yeah,
Lamar Meeks. He was a Georgia.
Yeah,
Georgia
yeah.
guy.
You know, another guy who mentioned Culpepper, not Culpepper, but Max Summerlin did a lot of the master rounds. Another guy that was pretty influential down there was Lloyd Culpepper.
Yeah.
He was from the South.
Which I would say was a protege of Max.
Yeah, he was.
They did a lot together.
He lived in Alabama. He was from, neighboring state there. But, Lloyd did a lot. He was did a lot for us down there. He stepped in
for Max, really, for those next few.
Yeah, he basically was the stopgap between Max and the current guys that I'm familiar with now. Right. He was the guy, that whole section in between. So he definitely had his hand in a lot of it as well. And so
when you talk about the 25th anniversary hunt, I mean, I think we can say that leading up to that, maybe a year or two before, we were already thinking that we probably needed to move the event. Some things had evolved, right? One of them we talked about being the proximity of the other major events. And the other was the fairgrounds were just starting to deteriorate.
They were. You know, the one thing I always remember that got so aggravating for us was the locking the place up at night. You know,
we had a lot of vendor stuff in there.
Yeah, a lot of vendors in there, and I remember having to lock up a door with a lead strap.
I know, a dog leash.
You know, it just every year we'd say something, and it just never would get fixed. But that,
yeah, it just started to evolve. But all that being said, Albany certainly deserved the 25th anniversary.
Sure,
we couldn't even think about moving that event till after that 25th.
Yeah. And that was a big deal that year too.
Sure was.
You know, we mentioned some of these big players. Jimmy Phillips is one that was very influential for us, and
Jimmy and Carol both.
Yeah, both of them there. Yeah, they were right from that area.
And we talked about they formed that Deep South Classic Club just to help with the Winter Classic. Basically, what started it.
So after 25 really successful years in Albany, 2013 and the 26 years whenever it made the move to Batesville, Mississippi.
Yeah, that was kind of a big time.
That was stressful.
It was
for me.
It was, and it was for me as well. I remember there was a lot, moving a successful event like that. But you mentioned we had the Grand American and Southeastern there in those 6 weeks, and then this event sandwiched in between those. And it was after kind of a recession there in 2008. People were having to kind of pick and choose what events they went to. And it seemed like the time was just right to look elsewhere a little bit. And that's where we looked to the west further. And that's kind of how Batesville came about.
Yeah, a little more central, right? And you're in South Georgia. You can't pull from the east very far. So
Right.
move it more towards the center of the
Right.
country while staying in the South. And I think, Alan, what you and I tried to do was we looked at club maps and tried to find the highest density.
Yeah.
Where's a pinpoint on this map of the highest density of coon clubs to support a major event? And we kind of settled on that North Mississippi area.
Yeah, you and I talked about it a little bit this morning when we were reminiscing here, but I went down, I made a trip myself, looked at about 3 different facilities. And then at some point you went down.
I went by myself on one trip.
Yeah.
Your travel schedule got messed up because we were both going.
Yeah.
And then you couldn't go. And I'm like, oh, shoot. Okay. Now you're looking at event facilities trying to make a decision that affects the whole sport without having someone else there to say, to help you with a decision. It's like, wow.
And not just that, we eventually decided on Batesville, a nice facility where we still are there, but that was tough. Even we took some criticism,
and detractors that said, coon owners are never going to want to go to a place like that.
Yeah, and there was, moving from Albany, that was, hey, Albany was nice too. Yeah. And I always said, as I hunted there before I worked here. So as a hunter, you didn't go there too because of the good game population.
Right.
You didn't.
Right.
And it still kind of works. We're from the north, and we still get a lot of people that come to the Winter Classic, when it's held that time of the year, just to get out from, cabin fever and things like that, But that's why we went down there, and it was Albany was really, really good while we were there. It was, and it's there's a lot of history there, and I loved it, you know, but not to take away from Batesville, it's changed it, but just kind of evolved, I guess.
What's the first?
Was successful.
Yeah,
it was a successful move.
Yeah.
There again, it was something you stress out about and think,
and it didn't take long. After the first year, we had a great entry. I don't remember what it was. Over 800 dogs entered in the first one, and it rivaled the records for Winter Classic. But that's the first year. But then it continued that, year 2 and 3. And at some point we had the largest entry there at Batesville.
It's so nice. Everything under that one roof.
Yeah.
It's just nice.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to ask. What's the first impression when you walk into a place like the Batesville Civic Center, and it's unlike any other place that there's a coonhound event held all year?
Well, that's what makes it stressful, right? You're thinking this could work.
Yeah.
It could be really nice. I think it made it a little easier in that, what did we look at? A half dozen places at least.
We did, yeah.
And there really wasn't a close second. There wasn't one. If there would have been one, more like a fairgrounds, and then you got this, that could have been, but there really wasn't a close second that I remember. So it made the decision easier.
The byways there and everything, it just kind of all came together. Yeah.
Being from Tennessee, I actually went to the Winter Classic before I ever went to Autumn Oaks. And when I walked into the Civic Center the first time, kind of was like, man, this is what a major event feels like right here. With you're on the concourse and everything's down there below you, and it's just decked out. And man, that more so than any other event, when you walk into one place and look around, you think, man, this is what a major event feels like. And I still feel that way going into that place.
Were you hunting a dog or just down there?
Hunting. Yeah, I was hunting a dog. Yeah. It was.
You think you're out of your element?
I was overwhelmed. Yeah, I was very overwhelmed.
Yeah.
But and talking about that first year, like you said, 885 advanced hunt entries. If you guys were worried at all about the entries, largest hunt entry to that date there in the first year in Batesville. But I think one of both of you guys' biggest concerns may have been the clay arena floor and how it was going to affect the venues and the bench show at the time.
I've not forgot about that. Dusty. It was dusty. They had clay bottom, clay, like 18 inches of clay, but then they had sand, like 6 inches of sand on top of that, and it got dry and dusty.
Oh,
and I remember the vendors complained about it.
The bench show, you're gating dogs around there, trying to level benches. Oh, it was. And they'd water it. It was costly to get the sand out for one weekend.
Yeah.
In the clay.
Yeah.
So, those were some trying years.
Yeah.
And man, Ronnie Stark you guys allude to him being the kind of the guide coordinator, and your guys' point of contact there in the Batesville area still is to this day. 10 years later, he's done a good job at helping that event grow and keeping hunters in
Yeah,
invested.
it's really served us well for the event, and it's been a good place, and I think it was a good move. Yeah, I do remember, we got some backlash, moving it from us from Albany like that. That was hard on me. It was I'd say it was probably the second most stressful thing I've had to deal with here at UKC was moving that event.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll say it, there was a few guys that I used to look up to that had their opinions on it, made their public comments about it, and it kind of,
stung a little bit.
It stung. Yeah. It did, but then it all worked out, and hey, that's where we left it. Let it speak for itself, but hey, and that's, you don't know. Sometimes you don't know until sometimes you try it, and that was one of them. On paper, I remember it looked good, and it has proven that. Oh, so it ended up being a good move.
Yeah.
Satellite clubs for that first year, you had, of course, you were hunting off the ground in Batesville. You had Arca Butla. I'm not familiar with that.
Arca Butla.
Butla, don't use it anymore. Walnut, Cassia, and then two I'm familiar with, Vardaman and Winona. Still use those to this day. And then I think you guys were not expecting as many entries. You got 885, quite a few entries, and called on Philip Herron over at the Mariana, Arkansas club, and he's also still doing that to this day, hosting Satellite Club for us. So, let's see. Went to 2 night slams in 2014. 2015, the slams were still being hunted off of at satellite clubs at the time before eventually moved to the grounds in 2016. And this is something I'm not very familiar with. In 2015, the top 10 bench show what you used to do is pick a breed winner from each of the recognized breeds for them to move on to Premier. Starting in 2015, you started actually awarding a top 10 bench show champion at the Winter Classic at the event. So that was a little note for the show there in 2015. 2017 is whenever it made the move from the last weekend in January to the second weekend in February. Was that just to kind of move it away from
it had to do with the Civic Center scheduling.
Yeah, Civic Center scheduling.
Or maybe us wanting to get the dirt out of the arena.
That was a big part of it, being able to do that. Yeah. It made it hard before based on the events they had.
Correct.
I think they had a rodeo or some cattle event the week after that.
Racing.
Yeah, something.
Gotcha. So, yeah. And again, something you may be worried about doing a date change and how it's going to affect your entry. Actually, the most entries in the event's history there in 2017, you had upwards of 1,040 advanced night hunt entries that year.
And that's still the record for UKC.
That's a good one.
Yeah. So it was either that or the fact that in 2017 was the first year that the Civic Center was able to move off all the dirt off the arena floor. So people say, yeah, let's go now that the dirt's gone, right?
Yeah.
The vendors came back, and man, the bench show was nice.
Yep.
Let's see. This year would have been just one important note with a Winter Classic coming up. We got Mary and Ronnie Bergbauer judging the event this year. But you guys talked about in the 2017 magazine, Scott and Connie Hogan judged the show that year as a kind of a husband-wife duo, and that was the first time it had kind of been done in a major event doing it that way. And now it's kind of something you almost try to do to make sure it's less problems with conflicts for judge.
Yeah, and it's kind of worked out. I think there's a couple others. Didn't we use the one from Virginia? Who was that we used, that husband and wife team? We're using them at Autumn Oaks, I think, this year.
Oh, you're talking about the Brooks?
Yeah, Brooks.
Yeah,
Brooks.
Yep. Eric.
We use them as well. So
yeah. Kind of makes sense to do it that way. 2018 started going with a computerized system for confirming entries. I know we've had some different tweaks to that over the years, but I think we finally got it ironed out and good to go by now, don't we? And one thing I wanted to talk about in this one, and we talked about a little bit. I know we've maybe even talked about it on the podcast before. Was this was the year that you guys recognized the eldest handler in the room. You probably had a conversation with this fella. David Pillow was his name. He was 75 years old.
Yeah.
He's hunting an 11-year-old dog, and you kind of gave him his recognition in front of the crowd before cast calls that day. Yeah,
I remember I was taking entries that day. You mentioned the new system that we were using, computerized system. So I was kind of hands-on that year, and he was in my line, and I just noticed he was an older fella, and I saw how old his dog was. He was hunting an older dog as well, so I asked him how old he was, and kind of set it up for later that night to kind of point him out in the crowd and everything. But yeah,
75 years old.
75, yeah,
and then unfortunate that night.
Yeah, that was a very unfortunate issue or incident that night. He's the one that had the stroke that night and unfortunately passed on that night. Something I'll never forget. It was a pretty big deal, But yeah, and just a super nice man. I remember when I mentioned his name earlier that night. He stood up there in the seats or whatever, and he was just a happy.
He was very proud of it.
Very proud of it and a happy
Good.
guy. And I guess things happen for a reason, But I'll always remember Mr. David Pillow.
Yeah.
And now, even to this day, we still recognize the eldest handlers in the room on that Friday, and that's always a big deal. We always have a couple that are over 70, and Mr. Charlie Morris, he'll be 81 this year, and I'm sure he'll be down there hunting. He's took home the plaque the past few years. So.
I think that's the only reason he still comes, just for that plaque, I think. But yeah.
Yeah, so that kind of brings us into the more modern times now. Something like 2019, the year I started, I would have started after the Winter Classic that year. But this is the year that you started hunting Grand Night champions and Night champions together, which kind of changed this event a little bit more. So, because Autumn Oaks, you still split them up because of the Grand Night division and National Grand Night champion. But at Winter Classic, you still the champion division consists of both Night champions and Grand Nights.
Yeah, and that's been an interesting event to kind of see how that unfolds, and it's worked quite well, really. Really. And today we don't even hear anything, one way or another anymore. If you think about it, we never hear anything anymore. But that was the first major event where champs and grands all drew out together.
Yeah, in that time, and from then on, we've kind of changed the awards, and there's quite a few awards given out that weekend. 1st through 10th champion division and 1st through 10th registered division each night, Friday and Saturday night, that we do the morning after at 9 a.m. there on the arena floor, and it's kind of a cool deal to be there.
Yeah, and I kind of like it, and I think the hunters like it as well. In the old days, we gave 5 placements for champion and only 1 for grand.
Yeah, right.
And now we're doing 10 registered and 10 in the champion division as well. So it's kind of working out.
Yep.
And you'd be surprised how many of those night champion dogs win their cast up against the grands,
Oh, yeah.
I think a lot of times I always thought me personally, is the grand division was the harder one to win, because a lot of times those were the dogs that are being hunted night in and night out, and if you had, oftentimes the grands were kind of on the back burner, and easier to beat, I always thought, if you had one that, if you had one that was ready anyways.
Yeah. So. I don't disagree with that. 2019,
and not taking anything away from them, but
yeah. And in 2019, also did away with the dual champion class at Winter Classic, and obviously that took them away from being able to compete in the finals. Probably has to do with something that the entry just wasn't there for that dual class, and they were moving straight to the overall.
Well, a little bit of that had to do with us having the dual national championship at Autumn Oaks.
Okay.
And we kind of took that away from, used to do that at the Winter Classic. And then that's where we had we used to have pairs at Autumn Oaks as well. Yeah. That we moved the pairs over to the Winter Classic. So, yeah.
Kind of can only do what you got time for, right?
Yeah.
Those
so there's a lot of
change it up a little bit once in a while.
You do, and we talked about the old days, and a lot of things have changed with the Winter Classic. What it looked like, and it's still cool to go back there to see where it came from and what it used to look like and what it looks like today. You mentioned a little while ago something about back in the day they used one long bench for the shows. Now we're giving a $15,000 award for our top 10 at the Winter Classic. How things have changed.
Yeah.
Definitely came across the years. Mm-hmm. Yeah, 2021 just here recently. Like you said, we got the top 10 bench show now. That's became a big deal, a standalone show on Friday night, and we've put a lot of effort into making that kind of this show of the year. Giving away $15,000. We do it under the lights there on the arena floor, and put a lot of effort into that. And also we started taking walk-up night hunt entries for the first time 2021 Winter Classic, and that's kind of became a big deal there. I think this past year we took over 197 over 2 nights at Winter Classic this past year.
And that's actually worked quite well for us, really. We don't use a waiting list anymore. Everybody that enters in advance, we don't put any of those on a waiting list. We use our walk-ups for our waiting list. We need wait-listed entries,
right.
But that has really worked well. It's pretty cool how it has worked out that way. So
yeah,
I think it kind of works for everybody. It's a little friendlier. If somebody didn't get entered in time or what have you, well, you can still do it on the day of.
Yeah.
It's going to cost them a little bit more for their entry fee, and it has to be that way. So, but yeah.
Yeah, so I thought this was kind of a fitting tribute to Winter Classic, one of the major events. Now 35 years of it. We're going to head into the 36th year of Winter Classic, a little bit about the history of it, and I hope you guys enjoyed us talking about it. Get out and compete against it. It's coming this year, February 10th and 11th, down in Batesville, Mississippi.
It makes you wonder what the next 20 years is going to hold.
Yeah, Trevor might have a lot more input and a lot more influence in the next 20 years than you and I.
When you're talking about the 50th one, it'll be Trevor there.
Yeah, it's funny. You probably didn't think back in the 90s what you were doing was going to be something that would be mentioned in a historical podcast. No. 30 years down the road. So being a part of history and these events is important stuff, and we have the ways to keep track of it and record it, and for people to know about it for forever. And
it's still just like the old days. It's still a fun event, one that I always look forward to every year. It's unlike Autumn Oaks. It's not the same. It's different, but still one that I thoroughly enjoy each year.
And we hope to see you guys in Batesville this year. Hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for listening to the UKC Hunting Ops Podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and to like and follow UKC Hunting Ops on Facebook and Instagram.